Greetings, Crypt dwellers. Dads from the Crypt are thrilled to continue celebrating the 30th anniversary of Demon Night by revisiting our deep dive interview with the film's writers, Ethan and Cyrus. Get ready for some spine-tingling discussions and spooky good times as we celebrate this cult classic. Stay tuned for more chilling content from the depths of the Crypt.
Hello, kiddies. Welcome to Dads from the Crypt.
Hello, boys and ghouls. Welcome to a very special episode of Dads from the Crypt. Today, I'm joined by your pal Mondo. Hello. And unfortunately, Jody couldn't be here, but tonight, we're joined by the writers of Tales from the Crypt Demon Night, Ethan Reiff and Cyrus Voris.
Hey,
hello out there.
How are you?
Good.
We're always happy to be talking about Demon Night with a K. It's one of our. It's a good thing. It's a fun thing for us to do.
And I'm always happy to talk about Demon Night any day of the week. So thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate it and being part of our week of Demon Night festivities. So let's just start off with some basic background stuff. Did you guys read any of the EC comics when you were kids? Were you aware of Tales from the Crypt growing up? The legacy going on there?
I think the original comics were before our time. I read a lot of, I did read Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, and I read, so I probably knew, I think there's like a British Tales from the Crypt movie from like the late 60s or early 70s before the TV show. And I read a lot of like monster comic books. So like not the EC stuff, because that was, again, before my time, but I was reading like, Marvel. They were at one point they were doing like Dracula comics and Frankenstein comics and werewolf comics and mummy comics and zombie comics. So I read all that stuff, and I got into the EC stuff much later when it was reprinted. But
yeah, when I was a kid growing up, I was aware of the original Tales from the Crypt comics. I think because I was into pulp fiction stuff, and maybe seeing some copies of comics at the comic book store, but I hadn't read a lot of them. I had a sense of sort of like the tone and the sort of everybody's gonna, you do something bad, it's gonna come back to fucking destroy you, morality aspect of it, which was kind of distinct and noteworthy at the time to me.
Mm-hmm. And how did you guys start your careers in screenwriting?
what's the short version of that, Ethan? We both went to NYU Film School.
Yeah, we were never students together at the school, but we had a mutual friend, and he threw a graduation party, and we met each other at the graduation party, and we were the only two guys we knew or had met who were trying to write traditional Hollywood feature film screenplays at the time at the school, which might sound insane or impossible now in 2021, but in the mid 80s, NYU was like an art film, independent cinema, documentary kind of a place. And Cy and I separately were just more traditional feature film, Hollywood storytelling kind of, guys. So we just sort of sparked to each other, and we were in the middle of trying to write our first scripts. And we said that when we finished, we'd exchange the scripts and read them. And we did that, and we were impressed with each other. And then we sort of started working together.
Cool. Well, then you guys moved to Los Angeles at the same time. Did you decide you were going to be, partners in screenwriting?
Well, there's a long stretch between those events actually, and we didn't move.
I was going to say that our origin story actually ties into Demon Knight, because Demon Knight was actually the first script that we wrote together. And basically what happened was we had a slightly older friend. It was sort of a mentor who was a screenwriter by the name of Mark Carducci, who wrote one of the writers on Pumpkinhead. And Mark at that point was sort of starting to work regularly in Hollywood. So he would get calls from these low budget filmmakers and low budget companies, but he was starting to work beyond that at this point because he was starting to get studio stuff. So I think he called Ethan up because he said, oh, this company wanted to know if I had any horror movies lying around, but they don't really pay enough. And so I want to give them your number to see if you have any horror stuff lying around. And then Ethan said, well, I don't have anything, but let me call my friend Cyrus, who I just met recently, and see if he has any old horror scripts lying around. And Ethan called me up, and I was like, I don't have anything, but these producers don't know that. Let's come up with something over the weekend, and we'll turn it into them on Monday. And
the marching orders for the project that the low-budget producer in New York was looking for was a horror story that all took place in one location. Right. So that was what we had as like the mission statement.
And we were both big fans of Romero's Night of the Living Dead, which takes place mostly in one location. And
also of Assault on Precinct 13, the John Carpenter movie. And in my case, I think Cy also, but in my case a little bit more because I'm like the big history guy and he's more the big comic book pop culture guy. Zulu, the feature movie Zulu,
which is a movie with big scope, but it's still at the end of the day, it's a bunch of guys stuck in one place being attacked by outside forces.
Fighting back against overwhelming odds is sort of a last stand kind of.
Yeah, it takes place almost entirely in the fort, right?
Yeah.
Well, in a sort of like a set of buildings with a bunch of sandbags around it, a place called Rourke's Drift. Yeah.
Right.
So we spent the weekend sort of banging out the treatment for Demon Knight with a third friend of ours named Mark Bishop. And we came up with this sort of outline and we turned it in on Monday. And the joke was that the producers totally hated it. I think the great quote was, this guy said, I like movies that move. So which was kind of weird since the mission statement I had literally gotten from him over the phone the week before was, it all takes place in one location. So, our characters moved around from like room to room or inside the house, outside the house from time to time, but he felt like it was too stagnant and whatever. But what we always say is it turned out to be a good thing, because if he had really liked it and sparked to that original treatment that we wrote that weekend, he would have paid us $5,000 for the screenplay and then gone off and made the movie for like whatever in like 1988 or 89 for probably a complete budget of $300,000 at the time or whatever. And that would have been it. And it would have been probably would have been pretty forgettable piece of work. Right. So thank God this idiot passed on Demon Knight. And then Ethan and I were sort of like, well, gee, we wrote this treatment already.
We disagreed. We felt like, wow, it's pretty damn good.
Yeah, we were like,
it came out of nowhere, and it just seems like it's really got a lot of great potential. Maybe we should turn it into a script ourselves on
right.
spec.
So that's when we basically decided to get together. We basically let's just write this thing. Mm-hmm. And I think the plan originally was Ethan and I were going to try to raise money and make the movie as a low budget feature, and Mark Bishop was going to produce it for us.
Yeah, we would co-direct it. We would all three of us would write it together. Our friend Mark would produce it, and Cy and I would co-direct it.
So obviously it got a lot bigger than it originally was. So what was in the original kind of treatment? Like was the key part of it was the whole mythology there?
Yeah, I think it was.
The truth is, it didn't I mean, it got bigger in the sense of at the end of the story of the production story, it got picked up by, it became a Tales from the Crypt project, right? Which is why you guys are so plugged into it, and is probably at least partially why it's been so successful. But the truth is, the screenplay itself, the story that and the characters that we came up with did not change very much from the original treatment that we wrote, banged out that weekend, through the fully fledged screenplay that we then sat down and wrote over the ensuing months or half a year, whatever it was, to the actual finished drafts that got optioned multiple times by multiple producers and directors before it finally got made by Tales from the Crypt. And when we first wrote the outline or the treatment, it was like 1988, I think. And when the movie got made in 1995, right? Or maybe they bought it from us to make it officially in 1994. So, it was at the time for us, it seemed like a long, hard road. But when, if you know about Hollywood, it's not that strange or unusual, that it took that much time.
And that script was a sort of calling card for us in the business. And you guys have probably done your research. It almost got made a couple of times before Tales from the Crypt with different directors. Tom Holland was going to do it at one point. He was the first guy that was attached to it. And we actually did a rewrite for Tom Holland. And I know that he was attached to it for a while. Then that fell through, and then Mary Lambert was going to do it shortly after Pet Sematary.
When she was probably the most sort of successful, celebrated horror director, in the movie business for that.
Yeah. The only thing I remember about the Mary Lambert version was that the different rooms in Irene's hotel were theme rooms, because she wanted to model it. There's this crazy hotel in Northern California called the Madonna Inn that has like a caveman room and a zebra room. And so she wanted to do that in Demon Night, so that Irene's hotel rooms were going to have different themes. That's the only thing I remember about the Mary Lambert version.
What's ironic about this so far is that Tom Holland and Mary Lambert directed episodes of the first season of Tales from the Crypt.
Oh yeah, wow. Of course.
So
we had a interesting, awesome crossing of the paths with Tom Holland actually recently at a horror convention, which we were invited to, and we don't get invited to a lot of those things, but we got invited, so we said, what the hell, it'll be fun, and so we showed up, and Tom Holland was there. And so we went over to him just to say, hey, you might not know, you probably don't know who we are. We never met in person, but we talked on the phone, and you were kind of a fan of this script that we wrote that ended up getting made by somebody else, but you were really into it at the time, Demon Night. And his reaction was like off the charts. It was awesome. He was like, that script was so good, and it was great. It was a lot of fun.
It was fun.
Yeah, that would have been an interesting, alternate universe. I could definitely see him making this movie. Probably a little differently, but definitely in his wheelhouse.
Yeah.
So I want to get a little bit deeper, though, in how you kind of develop some of these concepts. Because one of the reasons I love this movie so much is there's the mythology behind it. So how did you kind of come up with the idea of these keys and the collector and the knights?
Yeah, that's one of the things that, for the most part, stayed consistent from when we first, came up with the idea and developed it in the script until when it actually got made. Some of the details changed a little bit, but like I said, I'm the big history guy, and Cy was the big comic book guy. And this was the first time we had worked together. And the combination of history and the kind of pulpy, stylized, somewhat extreme comic book approach gave birth to all of that, and it worked out. I mean, it worked out pretty well.
It's funny. One of the one of the issues we had early on with when Tales of the Crypt came in and wanted to make the movie, one of the issues we had with the Crypt producers was that we sort of were constantly having to push back at them and say, this is a hero movie. It is a horror movie, but it's not the sort of traditional Tales from the Crypt
It's
structure.
not a monster movie. That was the thing.
Right. It's not a monster movie.
It's not a monster movie. There are monsters in it, and they're really important, especially Billy Zane as the collector, you know. But it's really, at its heart, it is a hero movie. And
Right.
that was the thing, not to get away from the mythology and maybe to get into some of the more details about the key and that stuff, which is cool in and of itself. But the thing that was a little bit original when we wrote Demon Knight was the genre mashup of heroic action and straightforward horror and mythology genres combined. We had not really seen that done. And that was one of the things we were really excited about when we came up with the idea and wrote it, you know, and now it's obviously a completely, totally different world. And it's been like a couple of decades since that's become pretty commonplace, but at the time it was kind of original.
Right. So let's talk about how when Tales of the Crypt became associated with it, how did things change?
Well, it's interesting. That's an interesting story also, because what had happened is we did finally come out to Hollywood. And actually, I think I want to credit our late mentor, Mark Carducci of Pumpkinhead fame also, because Mark had introduced us to a young sort of aspiring producer named Brian Witten, who was working for Joel Silver's company at the time. And Brian, we gave Brian a copy of Demon Knight, and he really liked it. And at the time, the Crypt series was still going on, and they had made a deal with Universal, a 3-picture deal to do 3 Tales from the Crypt features. But part of the deal was they had to submit all 3 scripts to Universal at the same time. And they had 2 other scripts. I think one, actually, I'm not sure. I don't know if one was Bordello of Blood or it was something else, but they had 2 of the scripts that were sort of supervised and done by the Crypt people. And they had this 3rd slot that was open, and they were trying to negotiate to get Tarantino's Dusk Till Dawn as the 3rd movie. And then Tarantino sort of blew up at that time, and they couldn't close the deal. And so they had this open slot, and Universal needed a 3rd script. And our friend Brian said, "Oh, I read this Demon Knight script. It's pretty cool. You guys should check this out." And I remember hearing from Brian that it was the only, they kept reading scripts for that 3rd slot, but there wasn't anything that all these big Tales from Crypt producers could agree on, because you had
Walter Hill, Robert Zemeckis,
Richard Donner, and Joel. And so the one script that they all could sort of grudgingly agree on was, they all sort of liked, was, I don't know that they loved it, but they sort of liked it, was Demon Knight. And so they threw Demon Knight in as the 3rd script as part of that package to go to Universal Studios for their Tales from the Crypt combo. And the joke is that Universal called them a week later and said, yeah, this is great, but the movie we really want to make first is Demon Knight. And so that became the first Tales from the Crypt movie, ironically, because it was not supposed to be that in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it was, our script was in that package when it was submitted. It was like the redheaded stepchild, because it was newly, you know, discovered by them officially, and it wasn't written by someone from in-house at Tales from the Crypt. So it was definitely planned to be the last of the movies, and then Universal wanted it to be the first one. It
was like a placeholder.
Yeah,
right,
but it
kind of
became it became the first movie, which was great.
Which, of course, we were very happy and excited, and it was awesome. Because we, at that point in our careers, we were starting to barely make a living by writing a lot of super low budget features back in the day when you could do that for people like Charlie Band and some other mostly genre, low budget, filmmakers. But we had not yet broken through to the studio world. And this was a movie that was actually going to be made and released by Universal Studios. So that was huge.
Right. So, I mean, obviously they added the Crypt Keeper stuff to the beginning and to the end. Did anything in the middle change at the request of the
well, that's thereby hangs the tail. That's
the biggest thing that we've talked about before, and I know Todd Masters, who's the makeup guy, has talked about, because of budget issues, they had us do a draft where the demons were just these sort of men in black, guys in suits with sunglasses. And then you would see situations where, like, somebody would get shot through the eye and the sunglasses, and there'd be like green goop or whatever. But that was like they basically said, okay, let's take the collector, the Billy Zane character, and just sort of make all his minions like him, sort of like guys in suits in human form. So there was a draft that we did that for Silver and the Tales from the Crypt people that was in that mode. And then really, I think it came from Todd Masters, who was the makeup guy on Tales from the Crypt, who said, guys, we're doing a movie called Demon Night. We got to put demons in it. Are you kidding? And so he did an incredible job.
Then the thing is, he found a way, that convinced them to reconsider putting the demons back in, but he had to find a way to make them into a physical reality on a limited budget. And he did that, and it worked incredibly well.
Oh, yeah. We talked about in our episode that the effects are amazing. The way the physicality of the actors and the makeup effects with the hair, and they've all got piercings. They're walking on like hooves.
It's so cool. Yeah, it's really cool.
It's awesome. It would have really lost something without that.
It would have. There was one other element. I mean, there's always some things that change whenever a movie screenplay goes from being the screenplay to being the movie, right? I mean, lots of things can change. There was one other large element that changed when they made the movie. And we kind of got fired over not really wanting to implement that change. And, that happens in Hollywood, whatever.
I think you guys might have heard of, or maybe you've heard of the original, let's say the lost ending of Demon Night. So we said that we were talking about the whole time we were, go ahead, Ethan.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the way to set the table for this, though, is that the script had existed for like 6 or 7 years. And like we mentioned, it had been optioned by multiple successful writers or not writers, but producers and directors over that time. And we'd done rewrites for all those people. So there were multiple versions of the script. But the one thing that had never changed throughout that entire 6 or 7 year development process was the ending. The action finale, the resolution to the story. People had picked at certain things or elements, or wanted to change this or that. No one had ever wanted us to change one iota of the ending of the movie.
Which had to do with Geraldine single-handedly being like, as we call it now, the final girl, and going up against the demons and ultimately going up against the collector. And because this circles back around to what we said before, how we always kept saying to them, this is a hero movie. Yes, it's a horror movie. It's got monsters, everything, but it's still a hero movie. It's about these heroes. Breaker is one of them, and then he passes this sort of the mantle, the Demon Knight, on to Geraldine, and she has to sort of take this fight on. And there was, I think because the movie was the Tales from the Crypt people were so used to doing the Tales from the Crypt formula that just didn't really register with them. And so they had an ending. They sort of took over and recrafted this ending where Billy Zane became this sort of like giant Oz-like head of fire. It was like this weird like CGI ending, and it was supposed to be big. And partially because the effects weren't really sophisticated enough at the time, and partially because it was just sort of wrong-headed, they tested the movie with this ending and it sort of died. Like the ending just sort of like went in the toilet. And then they basically went back and did a quickly concocted version of sort of the original ending that Ethan and I had always, and Mark had always come up with, which was having to have Geraldine go up against Billy Zane and the Collector.
And the scene, the line, one of our favorite lines from the movie, when Billy Zane walks in and sees Geraldine in the attic, right, drenched in blood, and says, "Oh, you're covered in blood. You must be in exquisite pain, my dear. You're covered in blood." And she goes, "It's not my blood," which had all been gone from that version that they had shot. But thank goodness was back in when they reshot the ending the way Sai's talking about.
That's interesting because I'm a really big Demon Knight fan. I've never even heard of that there was another ending that was shot. So
oh, wow. Yeah.
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, we heard that actually Robert Zemeckis was involved in just because of schedule stuff, because I think he Ernest wasn't available, and Robert Zemeckis actually directed some of that stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Zemeckis may have written that sort of the last exchange between Billy Zane and Geraldine. I'm not sure if Ernest directed that or if Zemeckis came in, but I know Zemeckis was involved in crafting, because at that point the movie was getting ready to come out. They had tested their giant head ending, which had died, and I think they felt like, oh, we got to scramble and do something, but they couldn't go back to our very original ending that we had written because it was a little bit.
No, but we did write that exchange.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the final, like they do the dance at the end.
Right.
The dance between Billy Zane and Geraldine. That was I don't know if I think Zemeckis might have written that dance sequence or whatever, but I know he was involved in crafting that, because they had already taken down the sets at that point. Yeah, they had struck the sets, so they couldn't just go back and shoot exactly what had been in the script before. They sort of had to adjust it a bit. But like we were saying, we were just happy that the point of it, the essence of it, the spirit of it, which was the audience being able to enjoy seeing Geraldine kick the ass of those fucking demons at the end, got made. Yeah.
So was it you guys who had the final moment of her spitting the blood out? Was that in your original script?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's that whole sequence where she has a mouthful of blood and he's like twirling her around. It's just
I think the notion was I don't actually
we probably didn't write the dance, but we wrote she was drenched in blood. He said, "Oh, you're in exquisite pain. You're covered in blood." The idea
was that the blood becomes an offensive weapon that she
and then she spat the blood at him. Yeah,
and that's what they went back to when they sort of reshot the ending.
Which ties back into your question that I sort of like brushed off about the mythology, right? And the thing that we found when we started to write the script was the mythology and the backstory and the history of the Demon Knights writ large, not just Breaker or, at the very end, Geraldine, but everyone who had come before, down through time. It allowed us, even though we stayed inside the four walls of the rooming house, the boarding house, it gave the story this like much, much wider scope, this sort of like almost epic, scope and reach beyond that location and the handful of people we were spending all our time with. And that was just like, we were just really happy, we didn't think about that in advance. It just was some good stuff that we thought fit in, and the whole thing with the Demon Knights and being the latest in a long line of, heroes who have to shoulder this terrible burden to protect humanity from the abyss. But it turned out to give us these other benefits for the story.
Right. One other funny story. I don't know if it was in relation to the title. I don't know if we've told before. It was always Demon Knight with a K. Ethan always says that that was always the title. And then at some point, somebody decided demons don't sell. Demons aren't commercial at the box office. So the title was changed to Judgment Night, with an N, like a night of judgment. And then while they were actually doing it for, I think Tales from the Crypt, when they got a hold of it, it was actually called Judgment Night at that point. And then there was another movie that came out with, I want to say
Emilio Estevez.
Yeah. Called Judgment Night. And so like they couldn't use the title anymore. And we were at a meeting, I think a notes meeting, and we got called into Joel Silver's office. And I was like, well, what? And Joel was like, what are we going to call this movie now? We can't call it Judgment Night. What are we going to call it? And Ethan stepped up and said, well, you know, Joel, the original title was Demon Night with a K. And there was this pause. And then Joel was like, it's good. Yeah, it's good. Let's use that. We'll put that on. And so we got the original title back onto the movie.
Sometimes being the loudmouth guy from Brooklyn actually helps, you know. Most of the time it doesn't, but once in a while.
So just what I love about the mythology again is that it could have just be a movie about people stuck in the house with demons around them, but the mythology is what really elevates it. And one of my favorite things, and this is what I was talking to William Sadler about, is when he has that kind of monologue where he finally explains to them the gravity of what's happening. And I now call that the Jaws scene. It's like Quint talking about the Indian.
Yeah. Oh man. Wow. That's, you know, no one has made that connection or used that reference talking to us about that scene from the movie ever before. And that's a huge like compliment to hear that from you. That's like, that's huge. And I have to, not to be like patting ourselves on the back, but I understand it. It does make sense. I mean, they're very different, but it has a similar impact and a similar effect, right?
Yeah. So when
I was good.
I was going to say was, so when I rewatched the movie, I might watch it every couple months at least.
Wait,
when I watched it for this, I like had my computer open and I was taking notes. I was doing it for more engaging and more proactive viewer. Yeah. And I started picking up on little things that I can see that I don't know whether you're intentionally taking from other movies. Obviously, Assault from Precinct 13 came up, but also like the whole beginning where you don't really know who the good guy and the bad guy is. Yeah. You've got the collector who looks kind of like a lawman, and Baker looks kind of like a bad boy. That kind of reminded me of the villain hero scenario from Terminator 2, where you have Arnold. You don't know if you think he's the bad Terminator. And Robert Patrick is the T-1000. He's like, looks like a cop. Yeah. So he's probably the good guy.
Unfortunately, I have to tell you, we wrote the script before Terminator 2 was made. But maybe Cameron took it from us. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. I swear.
Never know.
No, I think that was just a hook. That was just a cool thing that we wanted to say.
It was very intentional. It was
we think the collector is maybe the good guy at the beginning. Yeah. And then Breaker's the bad guy, and he's a thief, and he looks sort of scuzzy. So that was the idea was we didn't really know what the stakes and what the dynamic was until the collector basically punches his fist through poor Sheriff Tucker's head.
We didn't know who was good and who was bad and who was right and who was wrong. That was something that we.
I will say, I read something about Demon Knight, and somebody was saying like, "Oh, the scene where they punch the fist through his head, and it gets stuck on the head gets stuck on his fist, and he rips." That's like influenced or taken from some other. I'm like, no, it's not. We came up with that in like the very first outline because we were leaning into the crazy gore of it.
That's hilarious.
That was that's a bit from the very original outline.
No, one of the things that allowed our spec horror feature script to get embraced and then, by Tales from the Crypt and actually passed along to Universal, even though they thought it was going to be number 3 and not number 1, was from the very beginning, we had the serious mythology and the high stakes, but the script always was fun. It was always written. It was never written to be campy or laugh at itself in any way whatsoever, but it was written with a lot of dark, sardonic, grim humor. And so obviously that overlapped really well, I think, with the Tales from the Crypt tone.
Yeah, there was a bit that never made it to the final movie where I think Billy Zane gets injured or slashed across the throat, and Irene's looking at him in horror, and he picks up a cup of coffee and he drinks the coffee, and the coffee pours out the wound in his throat.
Awesome.
So, I mean, that tone and the idea of like punching your fist through somebody's head, ripping the head off, and then you've got the head stuck on your fist. That whole sort of crazy, again, very dark humor, comic book, crazy gore, and crazy tone was always in the piece from the beginning. I do want to say, it's funny, the monologue, I do want to say that Ethan and I and Mark wrote the original version, the monologue, but I think the final version that's in the movie was worked on by A.L. Katz and Gil Adler, who are two of the Crypt, sort of the mainstays. They were writer-producers on the series. So I just want to give them a little credit for that monologue you love so much, because I think they did some work on it. Because we weren't on the set. We were on the set once or twice during the course of the movie.
We were on the set once.
Yeah, we were on the set once, and I remember we met Bill Sadler, and Bill Sadler said to us, I think it was a backhanded compliment, said, "You guys read too many comic books."
Yeah.
So actually, when I talked to William Sadler, he said that he helped write part of that monologue too. Like he helped rewrite.
Yeah, he might have done that too, because I know it was slightly different from what the version.
Yeah, because our version wasn't. I was going to say it's sort of like a different. They're connected, but they're not the same scene. Because I was thinking about, there's the monologue about the backstory and the origin, and there's also the flashback to the Western Front and the trenches, with Bill Sadler as a doughboy in World War I.
Yeah, we always had the Jesus blood of Christ flashback in there,
and we also always had an origin story flashback for Breaker, but our origin story flashback was not.
Wasn't it wasn't it still World War I, but in like Africa? I think the Demon Knight that passed it to Breaker was like,
yeah, he was a Bantu warrior.
A Bantu warrior or something. So it was, and I think again, for budget reasons, they were like, well, what can we actually afford to do? We can't shoot this in Africa and do this crazy elaborate setup. So they did the version they did. But that's just, this is just the process of, going from production, and then obviously the director has input. Obviously for Tales of the Crypt, Katz and Adler had a lot of input, and then Bill Sadler again, because I know he was one of their favorite actors, so it makes sense to me that he contributed to that monologue.
Yeah.
Which again is another Robert Shaw kind of thing where he helped. Right.
Yeah, that's true.
And I'll just, not to be in any way mean-spirited, but just in the interest of full disclosure and transparency, since Cy generously and nobly mentioned A.L. Katz and Gilbert Adler as guys who had direct input into the final version of those scenes, I will mention that A.L. Katz and Gil Adler are the guys who fired us because we wouldn't change the ending to be something that failed miserably with the test audience and then had to be reshot and replaced.
It's true. So it was sort of, at the end of the day, we sort of felt like, well, we were right all along, you guys. See, you tried to do that dopey ending and nobody liked it. So,
Speaking of changes, I was looking at some articles, and one of them had just photos from the set of the different effects. And one of the photos I saw showed what looked to me like Geraldine possessed as a demon in full like makeup with the glowing eyes.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if we ever had Geraldine.
I think that may have been part of like the sort of like a nightmare dream image that she saw either in the scene that's there now, where he says to her, "Oh, you're going to get to go to Paris and it'll be great," and all that stuff, when Billy Zane is sort of like trying to seduce her into helping him by, letting him into the house and giving him the key. Or in the final dance, when he's again trying to sort of like win her over.
Yeah, I think that's probably
where that came from.
Okay, yeah, that's the first reference I've seen to that. Now, I was wondering, as you were writing this or as you were going through all the stages, did you have any ideas of who in your mind would play the various roles? Like Dick, I can't imagine anyone other than Dick Miller as Uncle Willie. Like,
there you go. You hit it out of the, you hit it on the nose that the one guy who was absolutely perfectly cast, who we would have literally said Dick Miller was Uncle Willie.
You know what? I don't think Ethan and I don't think we ever really write with particular actors in mind. I will say that I know the Tom Holland version, because he had worked a lot with Chris Sarandon. I know he wanted Chris Sarandon to play the collector.
Yeah, I could see that.
In the Tom Holland version. And I feel like even Ernest at one point, I think Ernest was trying, before they cast Bill Sadler and Billy Zane, I know he was talking about Wes Studi as Breaker, the Native American actor. And he really wanted Val Kilmer as the collector. Oh wow! I think Val had sort of blown up by that point, and they couldn't get him. But I know those were some of the other casting suggestions that were being bandied about. And I just heard this recently. I think Ernest mentioned this, that Joel Silver was really pushing for Cameron Diaz to play Geraldine. I heard that. So that's interesting. That's a whole different take. And she would have been interesting, but I think Ernest was the one that really pushed for Jada Pinkett, and I think it was a really great choice. And in fact, I would say all the cast, the entire cast of the movie is really terrific. It's really, I think one of the reasons the movie still works so well is the cast is great.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. So one of the characters that people don't really talk much about, but I always found very interesting, is Cordelia. As one of the more...
Oh, poor Cordelia!
Cordelia. He is such a complex character with such a tragic arc. Can you talk about how you kind of came up with that?
Gosh, I don't know. I think we're just,
The truth is, when we first peopled the boarding house with the cast of characters, it was... in the very beginning, they were filling a role, right? It was like, well, who's gonna be there? Well, we need the person who runs the place. We need, probably there's a prostitute who works out of the place. Then there's the prostitute's customer. Then there's the guy who doesn't have any place else to live, which is Wallace Enfield, the postman. The postal guy. And then there was Uncle Willie, and then. They all came to life. Some of them more inspired by or filled by, people from our own lives or our own, circle. And like Uncle Willie was, I think, to some extent for both Cy and myself, we both had, because I've known Cy now for like really, really, really long time. So I know we both had crazy uncles growing up. Right. Obviously, in Uncle Willie's character name, the uncle is like apocryphal. Right. But for me and Cy, I'll just speak for myself. One of the biggest characters / human beings of my childhood and young adulthood was my Uncle Irwin, and Uncle Willie is at least, somewhat significantly Uncle Irwin. And I think, Cy, don't you have...
there's a line, there was an original line in the script that I think never made it to the final version, where Breaker says to Willie, "Hey, Willie, whose uncle are you anyway?" And he says, "Don't rightly know, but people call you something and it just sticks, No, actually it's funny because I think, for me, Ethan, the very first draft. So not my uncle, but my great aunt ran a rooming house in Lancaster, Ohio, and I think the original.
Yeah, that was the location. That was the actual identified location in the original.
It was a small town in Ohio, and she had a rooming house, and there was like an Uncle Willie type character who was a sort of a local drunk. Whose name was Homer, and he was sort of an inspiration for Uncle Willie. But and actually the small town in Ohio, that rooming house location stayed really up until pre-production, and again it was sort of like, well, I think the idea is they were shooting it in LA, and the idea of doing more of a desert location.
Well, and also because they ended up actually building the entire location inside an airplane hangar that they took over to use as the sound stage. So there was, it would have been too much. They just making it like a big Adobe building
in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the
way to go in the middle of the desert, as opposed to someplace in, like Sai's talking about, Ohio or the Midwest or back east.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Especially when you're shooting the whole movie quote at night.
Yeah, exactly. But circling back around, Cordelia, I think, she was just sort of like the sexy girl with the tragic past. And, in typical, it is still a horror movie. So you do know that, people are going to be knocked off one by one. So I think we were just trying to make sure everybody had an interesting character and some interesting bits, and then had a satisfying, little arc before they're ultimately killed by the collector.
Before their demise, their inevitable or demise.
Now, I was reading, I think in the novelization version, there was an allusion to her being a former school teacher.
Oh, okay. Here's what's hilarious. I love the Demon Knight novelization because, so there's two types of novelizations. One of the more surreal things, if you work as a screenwriter, is to have your screenplay turned into a novel by somebody else. And there's two types of novelizations. There's the novelizations where the novel writer just basically takes the screenplay and transcribes it into prose and just sort of expands sort of what's there, but doesn't really put anything else. But whoever wrote Demon Knight, and the name escapes me, really invested a lot of time and energy and brought a lot of original material. They created a whole, a whole extra backstory to Breaker. They like you said, they created weird stuff about Cordelia, none of which Ethan and I wrote or had anything to do with, but it was really entertaining. I was like, oh, this guy's actually working for the paycheck.
Yeah, not weird stuff. Just, I think Sai means interesting stuff.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah,
not necessarily bad, but just like, oh, that's funny. I wouldn't have gone in that direction, but I'm glad that somebody actually expanded on it. Because again, the worst thing is to read a novelization of a movie that's literally just, oh, they just added some words, and you get frustrated as a screenwriter. You're like, well, I could have written that novelization and gotten that money because this guy didn't do anything. But the Demon Knight novelization is actually really good and really fascinating.
The one other thing I will say about the whole cast of characters who are stuck in the boarding house, and this came organically, to use like a Hollywood development catchphrase or word, right? Or it came very organically, because when we sat down to write the original treatment, we sort of knew that we were going to end up with one survivor successor for Breaker to pass on the mantle of being the next Demon Knight to at the end, but we did not know who was going to be. Mm-hmm. So we had to treat the entire ensemble cast equally. We had to hope to try to convince the audience while they were watching, if we got to that point, which we did, that any of them could have been the last survivor, right? And I think that us writing it that way, and then like Sai alluded to before, the really excellent cast combined to make it work. Like I think, it could have been Cordelia in the beginning. Maybe she would have ended up being the next Demon Knight, or maybe even it could have been Uncle Willie. That would have been tough, but you never. It's not impossible. Or Irene.
Hey, wait a minute. If we knew Dick Miller was going to play Uncle Willie, we would have made Uncle Willie the Demon Knight.
He would have definitely survived. That's true. Yeah.
But definitely not Roach. Because
you're right. That is correct. You are correct, sir.
That guy's doing.
So I have to say,
another great performance.
Oh, Thomas Hayden Church, and I will again give a shout out. A lot of the Roach humor was stuff that Thomas Hayden Church improv'd on the set. I know that from Ernest, and like he was just coming up with weird, crazy bits and lines all the time. I mean, that whole thing where like, you know, Cordelia's like clamped batteries to his nipples and is like screwing him and like shocking him at the same time. And he's got all these great ADR lines, additional dialogue recording where he's like, you know, my nipples are smoking, all this hilarious stuff. And that was all like Thomas Hayden Church coming up with crazy shit all the time. So he was terrific in that movie.
But the car battery was your guys' idea?
No, I don't think so. Honest to God,
well, yeah. I mean,
I don't think so.
I don't think it was that we had together with Ernest, we had developed and written another big scene with Cordelia.
Ernest will talk about this. Yes, Ernest talks
at the end of her character arc, there was. Yeah, we won't talk about it. We'll leave it because probably
we can bring it up. But Ernest, we were at this time. There was a lot of crazy R-rated and X-rated Japanese anime things coming out, and either I don't know if Ethan and I came up with this or Ernest came up with this, but. Ernest and we got along very, very well. We had like really similar cinematic movie influences. Like the first time we met him in the lobby of the Silver Pictures building, I had on like a Lone Wolf and Cub T-shirt, and he was like, "Lone Wolf and Cub, I love Lone Wolf and Cub." I was like, "Really? You know what that is?" So we just were very much simpatico in terms of, you know, right. And
what's the tone for the story.
The three of us came up with this notion that Cordelia in the final, her like basically her vagina was gonna open up and have like teeth and claws. She was gonna have like a crazy demon vagina that was gonna attack poor Wallace Enfield, and Ernest, I think, fought for that up until the very end, and they're like, "There's no way you could put that in a movie." I think Universal or somebody said, "Even R-rated, we're not going to get that passed in 1995."
And it might also have been like a budget thing because it was going to cost more, also.
Oh, I think it was beyond. But I'm sure there may be drawings by Todd Masters, the effects guy. I think they were going to try to do this at a point until somebody, I don't know if it was the studio or if it was. Somebody at Silver or Zemeckis or Don, somebody might have said, "No, we're not. You can't." Oh no, I know. It was Richard Donner's.
Oh, Lauren Shuler Donner.
Lauren Shuler Donner.
No Pussy Monster. That was
no Pussy Monster. That was it. She was like, "You're not putting this in your crazy Tales of the Crypt movie."
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
All right, here's one that goes a little in the weeds, so bear with me. Our friend Natalie, when we did the review, brought this up, and I wanted to bring it up with you guys. So the first demon knight we see is running across the Stations of the Cross. His name is, I'm going to try to say this right, Sirach. And that name is also known as the Book of Ecclesiastes, if I'm saying that right. It was a Jewish book of wisdom. Was that an intentional call out? What is there a connection there?
Yes, that was not a happenstance. Yep, that's a good in the weeds observation.
All right, thank you, Natalie. Okay, so let's go back for a second. Tell us about how you developed the collector. What was your original vision, and then what did? Obviously, Billy Zane gives an amazing performance, and I'm sure it takes it like up to 1,000.
He's amazing. He's amazing.
Well, what was your original kind of concept for that?
I think in the original version, and again, Ethan and I haven't like reread the original Demon Knight script in a while, but he was actually a Bible salesman.
Yes, he was.
He was a Bible salesman.
The case was a Bible case, and then it also had the space, like under the Bibles or whatever for the key.
And he had a couple of Bibles, and I remember in that opening scene where you finally in the scene where he sort of confronts Breaker, and again, the whole idea was he was supposed to be very charming and very charismatic. So, and the idea is
even heroic in appearance,
Yeah, like, oh, this Breaker guy's bad news and he's a thief. So you don't really know who's the hero and who the villain is. And I remember there was a bit, he had the Bible case, and there was a Bible that he had pulled out at one point. And as part of that opening scene, Irene or somebody flips open the Bible and it's like it's all printed backwards. Everything's backwards.
Yeah, that was cool.
But yeah, I mean, I think it was just to do this charismatic, fun, seductive bad guy who initially you think might be the hero of the movie because he's sort of cool and interesting, and then all that stuff sort of twists. But I remember, yeah, he was a Bible salesman originally, and then at some point that fell out. I'm not exactly sure why or how, just during the development.
Mm-hmm. So going back to a couple other movies, I'm wondering if you pulled things out of or just like kind of through osmosis. So I found some connections to the Alien franchise. So like the xenomorph, when you shoot the xenomorph, it spits out the acid blood, and when you shoot the demons in the eyes, shoots the eye beams. Was there a connection there?
I don't think it was just more that notion of the eyes being the windows to the soul. That was just, obviously you have to create some rules to kill your creatures. It's like vampires have rules, werewolf have silver bullets. So it was like, what cool rule can we come up with?
The big elements for us in the demon mythology were the eyes and the blood, right? Mm-hmm. Because the blood having its origins in, holy blood,
right? Christ blood.
Even though it's thinned out with mortal blood or human blood throughout the centuries, but there's still an element of that there. The blood being this defense, and that's like Cy alluded to earlier. At the very end of the movie, Geraldine, as the new demonite, turns the defensive weapon into an offensive weapon by spitting the blood at the villain. But up until then, the blood is the defensive weapon, and there's a very limited quantity, and that's why Breaker or whoever is the demonite has to always be on the run, because if they get caught, if they get stuck in one location, they're going to have to use up that supply, and there's not a lot more to go.
I mean, we love both Alien movies. I think the biggest influence of Aliens is just that it is that sort of hybrid horror action movie.
Or sci-fi. Yeah, that's true. The sci-fi action movie. Yeah.
What about the scene where Geraldine and the Bob hug themselves and throw the grenades? Is that like Vasquez and Gorman?
Oh, yeah, I think that's sort of I think that's sort of like the
Irene.
sacrifice.
Yeah,
Irene. I think that's probably subconsciously, consciously. That's because now that you said that, I was like, oh, that's a great moment in Aliens. Yeah, that's also a Demon Knight. Yeah, I think that's fair.
We did both Cy and I loved Aliens. I mean, it's not any big deal. Everybody, I guess,
No, and I'm not disparaging. I'm just,
No. I know. No, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean to say that defensively in any way, shape, or form. I'm just thinking about it that both of us really, really deeply loved that movie.
Right.
I would say, another movie that we didn't mention that I think was a real influence on Demon Knight was Evil Dead, the very first Evil Dead, because the fact that again, people trapped in a single location, but that the fact that you could keep it dynamic, and I think
a lot of
energy and the over the top insanity of the gore and the inventiveness of the gore in Evil Dead, I think was a big influence.
Well, to take it one step further, people getting possessed, and then you turn around and someone's got the big eyes and they're all attacking.
Yeah.
Evil Dead.
No, and I always felt like, because again, originally the idea was we were going to try to sort of make Demon Knight ourselves on a low budget. I always felt like that version would have looked more like Evil Dead, because again, it was another movie made for not a lot of money, but incredibly inventive.
So going back 1 second, she's talking about the rules. You're talking about using the key as an offensive. So obviously there's that scene where she tries to stab him, the collector, in the eye, and he pretends like it's hurting, but he's actually, no, that only works on low-level demons. So
right.
It means that there's a hierarchy of demons. So I'm wondering, is the collector, what level is the collector? Is he like middle management? Because he tries to bring Geraldine over. So I'm wondering if this is his way of like kissing up to the boss. Like, can I get that?
Yes, I think that's a great analysis. I think he's pretending. It's like every boss you've ever had who pretends to be a big shot, but he's really just middle management level, and he's got a boss who's above him. I think
honestly, also that question connects to something which it isn't depressing or anything, but one of the things Cy and I would have loved to have been able to do would have been to expand on investigating those kind of questions and developing the hierarchy of the demonology and the, you know, command system in sequels to the movie. And it's funny because whenever we go to a convention or we talk to people and somebody, you know, finds out that we wrote Demonite and is a fan, we always get the question, why aren't there sequels to Demonite, you know? And of course, the simple answer is it's two parts. One is the second Tales from the Crypt movie, Bordello of Blood, kind of put the kibosh on, you know, that franchise continuing for the immediate future at the time, right? That sort of like was just not, it wasn't a success. And then the second one is because there's so many like owners involved, right? Because Demonite was released by Universal, but it was made by Tales from the Crypt, but it started out as our original thing, but then Tales from the Crypt bought it. And who is gonna, you know, who is actually legally able to make a sequel?
Yeah, the rights to Tales from the Crypt are so convoluted and crazy. They tried to do a reboot of the series, as you guys probably know, recently with M. Night Shyamalan was going to do it, and they announced it, and even then they couldn't make it because the rights got
yeah, right. That's even the bigger question is because it has because Demonite is inextricably woven together with Tales from the Crypt. People can't do Tales from the Crypt itself, so how are they going to do something, you know, even more?
Yeah, we always said it was sort of a trade-off because had Demonite been made as like a low-budget straight-to-video movie, there probably would have been 3 or 4 sequels by now. But because it was made at a higher level by better filmmakers and a bigger budget and released by a big studio, but under the Tales from the Crypt banner, it's basically trapped along with everything else in the sort of Tales from the Crypt legal swamp. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, you guys took it exactly where I was heading to kind of wrap up that talk. Yeah, we would love a sequel, or even like I was thinking a graphic novel, like a prequel graphic novel going through the ages.
Yeah,
that kind of thing would have just been.
Yeah, I think the original idea, Ethan and I were talking about, the original sequel was going to be set in a big city. The idea was Geraldine was going to travel to like New York or Chicago or Cleveland or someplace. And so it was going to be an urban feeling as opposed to the desert, middle of nowhere. And then we talked about a third Demon Knight where we were going to bring back other Demon Knights from the past to like have one big final battle with the Collector. And
yeah, that might have been connected to like the coming millennium, probably.
Yeah,
because the movie came out in 1995, and I think that would have been somehow tied into the significance of the year 2000, which probably would have been bad, but you know, it was cool at the time.
I would have bought a ticket to see that.
The one other thing I'll say about the unmade sequels to Demon Knight is, like when I was a kid growing up and wanting to be a filmmaker, director, movie maker, whatever, and then becoming a writer, my parents were not super enthusiastic about it, but they didn't like piss on it either. You know, it was fine. But my dad never really had much to say good, bad, or indifferent about it. And the one time when my dad said to me, "Hey, are you gonna make a sequel?" was when he saw Demon Knight. That was like he literally he saw it and he said, you know, pretty good. Is there gonna be a sequel? And I realized, it does naturally lend itself to it, right? There's like so many, it just totally naturally lends itself to that, whatever. Which now, I mean, my dad's been dead for a while, so I hadn't thought about that for a long time. So it's kind of a nice, it also connects to your whole Dads from the Crypt thing, but it is a really, I have a couple other like movie profession memories connected to my dad, but not many. And that's definitely the best one, you know.
It's awesome.
I just thought of one more question that I want to ask, at least Demon Knight related. So there's the scene with the kid. I'm blanking on his name right now. And he's reading a Tales from the Crypt.
Danny.
And he's reading a comic book, and that's kind of how he gets. I love this twist of like the EC comic is what possesses him. The comic that we were only told was bad is what turns him. Was that part of your guys' script, or was that like a nod to Demon?
I think that was either we came up with that when we were rewriting it for the Crypt people, or probably Katz and Adler came up with that to tie it back into the original show. And
I don't really remember either, and it's like a 50-50 coin flip probably, because Cy more so to like almost like a professional capacity, but both of us grew up reading a lot of comic books and we're big comic book lovers as kids. So having the kid, needing to be seduced by the powers of the demons, it sort of lends itself. But I don't remember. We did a few passes after it was the Tales from the Crypt movie, so we might have done that, or like Cy says, it would have been Katz and Adler, which also makes sense because they were the Tales from the Crypt guys.
Right. Wow. I can't think of any more Demon Knight questions, and that's saying something. Is there any Demon Knight questions you want to throw in?
Well, Ethan, I'll ask you here. You said you're a metalhead. You love history, so I'm just gonna shoe you in for an Iron Maiden fan.
I mean, yeah, of course. Are you going to ask me about? Are you going to ask me about the Trooper and the Crimean War and the Battle of Balaclava?
Well, as you know, it's always a hotly debated debate. But what is your favorite Iron Maiden record?
My favorite Iron Maiden
record.
Oh man! All right, that's tough. It's good you didn't ask my partner this question, because that's tough, because obviously Number of the Beast, that's got to be the answer. But for me personally, it's probably Peace of Mind, because that's the first time I saw them at Madison Square Garden for that touring for that album. And also it's got the Trooper on it. So, which as a history buff, especially into Victorian military history, a heavy metal song about the charge of the Light Brigade, it just doesn't fucking get better than that.
Right. That's the beauty of Iron Maiden, right? They throw in all that historical actual accuracy to go along with great music. I'm always I'm a Somewhere in Time fan.
Okay.
Well, I think one of the less loved ones, one of the first Iron Maiden songs I fell in love with was Stranger in a Strange Land.
Yeah.
As a young kid.
But you are a little younger than me. So that's a little
maybe
further down the Iron Maiden road,
Maybe, but what's great about Iron Maiden, I'll say another, as a dad, I took my kid to go see them probably about 4 years ago.
That's amazing. That's awesome.
Man, and you know what's funny? I was sitting next to Les Warner of the Cult, which is also another little fun tidbit. But she doesn't care about Iron Maiden. She was there to see Ghost because she wanted to see Ghost.
Okay.
And at the end of that show, she's like, "That was the best band ever."
Oh, that's awesome.
There's a timeless band. So I'll ask you one more. So the soundtrack for Demon Knight was actually really deep in the metal genre, which at the time you didn't see at all. Did you guys have any input in that at all?
No, I think it was a, we mentioned this friend of ours that worked for Joel Silver named Brian Witten, who went on to be a executive at New Line and produced a lot of movies. I think Brian was really involved in the soundtrack of that movie. And in fact, I was going to say, I think before the song went, I think that's the first official public appearance of Hey Man, Nice Shot by Filter in the opening.
Wow. Yeah.
Which is a great song and worked great in the opening. And I don't think that song was actually
released
until later. That was like something they stumbled onto very early on. I think that was, and it became a big hit, but at the time it was like,
Cy, you probably remember this also, but that band, the front man and like the real creative force behind that band was like managed by Steve Friedman, remember, who was our man.
True? Oh,
yeah. I think Friedman got that music to Brian Whitten. Yeah.
No, it was a cool soundtrack.
Cemetery Gates.
Yeah.
It is a really good soundtrack.
Grave Diggers.
Cy and I are big soundtrack guys, and we generally prefer soundtracks with much more original score, than Needle Drop, so called. But I have to say, one of the great things about Demon Knight is it's a movie that has a lot of needle drop, a lot of songs used as soundtrack cues, but it works great. It's done very, very well.
Definitely. And so I'll ask you too. So I pick a song every week, and the song I picked for Demon Knight was a song by Biohazard called Punishment. You guys being from New York, were you a Biohazard fan?
And well, Cy, why don't I let you answer?
I gotta ask.
First of all, I went to school in New York. I lived in New York for 10 years, but I'm not from New York. And no, I'm not a Biohazard fan, unfortunately.
Oh.
What can I tell you? Ethan, are you a Biohazard fan?
The truth is, I'm neutral on Biohazard.
Okay.
I have nothing against Biohazard, but nor do I really have that much in favor of Biohazard. If I'm driving down the highway and as usual, I'm listening to Ozzy's Boneyard, and Biohazard comes on, I'm not going to change the channel, but I'm not going to go searching for Biohazard either.
And what's funny, that's the ultimate metalhead answer, because most of my metalhead friends are like, you like Biohazard? I'm like, yeah, they put some good stuff out.
Look, when I was growing up in New York, I was a metal guy and I was also a hardcore guy.
Yeah.
Not so much a punk guy, punk adjacent, but not really a punk guy. So like my favorite bands are Motorhead, the Misfits, the Ramones, Metallica, and Iron Maiden,
Nice.
and then I'll throw in like Accept, and a few others, but
I love it because I'm a big Motorhead fan too. All those bands,
good.
all those bands hit with me.
And AC/DC.
How can you hate AC/DC?
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Well, hate? No, I mean that.
Don't trust someone that hates AC/DC. So if you guys had to pick, if you guys could put one song, it doesn't have to be metal, one song on that soundtrack, what would it be?
On the Demon Knight soundtrack?
Yeah.
Oh my God. No, I can't think. I mean,
You were a.
I know, but were we Ethan, anything? Oh, okay. I will tell you right now. There is a what's the name of the song? Oh my God, it's killing me. There is a Joy Division song.
Oh, there you go.
Which oh God.
That we probably listened to because you played it while we were
writing. I know. There's a Joy Division song where the lyric has something to do with I walk through many different times. The blood of Christ on their skins. It's terrible. I'm blanking on the name of the song, but it's a really dark Joy Division song that has a lot of sort of Demon Knight sort of mythology type stuff in it.
Wilderness, maybe?
Yes, I think it's Wilderness. I think that's the song by Joy Division. Check it out. It's a very Demon Knight-y song. It's not metal, but I think metal people would still like it. It's a pretty heavy song.
I'm metalhead. I'm a metalhead, but I just like dark music, and definitely Joy Division fits in with that.
Yeah, there you go. So that's my Demon Knight pick.
I shouldn't step on that by saying anything else music related, but I'll give a very concise answer to your question, which is the song I would pick would be For Whom the Bell Tolls.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
Great call.
Which, for Cy's benefit, I'll tell him is by Metallica.
Oh, okay. Even I know Metallica, so,
The song that came in my head was Devil Went Down to Georgia by Primus.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's cool. That's a good
awesome. And you know what? I haven't heard that version of that song in like 10 years, and when we get done I'm gonna go listen to it because that's an amazing version. That's great.
Yeah, I may have to listen to Wilderness by Joy Division also.
Yeah, I'm definitely listening to that as soon as we're done.
Okay, so we usually wrap things up. Well, I'll give you a chance to plug anything that you want to promote in a second, but we usually wrap things up here at Dads from the Crypt by talking about dad advice. So as fathers, what fatherly advice, good or bad, useful or not useful, would you like to impart onto us and to other fathers?
Oh my God. Are there fatherly advice? Well, okay. I would say that the only thing I would say is that I I would say dads appreciate the fact if you have boys, appreciate that your job in the future is relatively easy, because with boys, I found you really just have to focus on basics. Don't rob a liquor store, don't steal a car, and don't get anyone pregnant. If you have girls, you're really in trouble because you potentially have, there's, psychodrama and soap opera and boyfriends and cliques and mean girls and all kind of stuff that is a real headache. So dads, if you have boys, relish the easiness of your future parenting.
No, that's a good one. That's a good one. Man, that's I got a dopey procedural piece of dad advice, right? Which I kind of wish when I first became a dad, I kind of do wish somebody had said to me, and it may sound stupid and pointless and like a waste, but write stuff down. Because when you're a dad with young kids, and then as they get older, little by little, like so much amazing shit happens all the time. And at the time, I never thought I was going to forget any of it, because it was all so distinct and clear and amazing, whether it was good or bad, because a lot of bad stuff happens as well as good stuff, right? But and I still remember the high points and lowest points and the highest points. But with 3 kids who are all now like adults, I do wish I had sort of like gone out of my way more to just like mark down stuff, even the briefest, most succinct, simple way, this happened here, this happened there, or whatever. Just so when I got old and foggy headed like I am now, I could look back and instantly remember more stuff.
That might actually be the best dad advice we've ever given on the show. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Legit. That's great.
Very well, Ethan. That's awesome.
Okay, before we wrap up, what are you guys working on? What do you want to promote?
Ooh, that's a good
one. We're working on stuff. The only thing to promote, I think on Netflix, Ethan and I worked on the 2nd season of a medieval
a show connected to Demon Knight.
Yes, a medieval Knights Templar drama called Nightfall, which is running on Netflix now. There's 2 seasons. We worked on the 2nd season. The 1st season is a little more sort of like very clean and sort of fairy tale King Arthur-y. And the 2nd season, Ethan and I came on as part of a reboot team. And it's like, let's make this show much more gritty and much more violent and much more historically accurate. So the 2nd season of Nightfall, you don't have to even seen the 1st season, really. You can just sort of jump in on the 2nd season. And I think it's pretty cool. It's pretty gritty and pretty, it's as Ethan says, I guess it's tied to Demon Knight because it's also knights.
Yeah, it's knights. There you go.
You guys should totally shoehorn that into a Demon Knight sequel. Just start having demons showing up.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a brilliant idea.
Just not even mention it. And just have like, oh, here's this key we found.
There is. That's hilarious. That's awesome. There is one other thing we can promo. Mm-hmm. We're the writers, and if it goes forward, we'll be the showrunners on a project that's still in the creation phase, but it's inspired by, especially because of the dads element, right? And especially if there's dads out there in your listening audience who have little kids or middle school kids or maybe even high school age kids. It's inspired by this nonfiction book called The Astronaut's Instruction Manual. And it's a great book about like preparing yourself for space, for what it'll be like and how you'll, what you'll have to manage to do in order to survive when and if you go into space. And there's a lot of like actual practical stuff like how to hold your breath or how to hang upside down or how to swallow your toothpaste or by accident or whatever. And it's just really, it's pretty cool. It's the show that we developed out of it is a fictional 1-hour drama, but it's about high school kids preparing to go to space. So I would definitely say if you have kids who are at all into space, definitely get it. If you have kids who aren't into space, you might want to get it anyway because it's just pretty cool.
It's a cool book.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a cool book.
That sounds really interesting. A lot like kind of like The Martian, but reverse.
Yeah,
actually, it's true. Yeah. I think
we hope it'll be like that. Yeah.
Yeah, the book is by a guy named Mike Mongo, and you can find it on Amazon or any place else. And Ethan and I are just pushing the book because we are doing a TV adaptation that we'll see if it actually gets made and goes forward. But the book is terrific.
Okay, well, if those things come to pass, you're always welcome to come on the show and talk about them and get some awareness. That sounds really cool. You're always welcome
thanks
to come
very
back.
much.
And really appreciate you guys coming on. This is an awesome interview.
Thanks. It was great. We, like Ethan says, anytime we get to talk about Demon Knight is super fun.
No, it is. It's always a lot of fun for us. Demon Knight was the first thing that we ever worked on together in our careers, and now it's literally like more than 30 years later, and our careers are still chugging along. So we owe a huge debt to Demon Knight and all the people who liked it, who watched it, and continued to watch it.
Okay. Well, that wraps up another episode of Dads from the Crypt. We'd really appreciate it if you would give us a rating and review on iTunes. And we thank you for listening. Have a good night.
Follow Dads from the Crypt on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or I will follow you to the grave. No, seriously, you really should watch. But be careful what you ask for. You may get it.